Oh, you're always interviewing. Like that, if you're a sales leader, that is one of your core roles. You should be interviewing people every single week. You should be recruiting constantly. Okay, so rule of thumb. For every minute of a meeting, you do a minute of prep. Simple.
Hello, and welcome back to the Inquisitor Podcast with me, Marcus Cowley. Today, I'm genuinely delighted to have David Weiss, who is an enterprise sales leader, author, speaker, podcaster, and in particular, a very successful enterprise salesperson in his own right. And he's written a book with another one of my guests, Andy Rasick, on career pathing within the sales environment. So, David, would you mind giving a quick 90 seconds of how you got to where you are?
Marcus, first, thank you for having me on the show. Very excited to be here. How I got where I am. So I started on my journey in sales about 14 years ago. And I was graduating college. In fact, same college that Andy and I went to and met at. And I had a degree in psychology and marketing. And I was thinking about my path. And I had kind of a crossroads. Do I want to stay in school and go get my PhD in psychology or my MBA in marketing? Or do I want to start making money? And my parents helped me make that decision. They cut me off and they said, we're no longer paying for anything. And I was like, all right, that's cool. And I appreciate everything you've done for me. Let me actually earn my way in this world. And so I decided with my combination of degrees, sales seemed like a pretty natural fit. So I got into sales, started off with an organization that didn't really provide any sales training, any really sales direction. They sequestered you in a hotel for a month and taught you product, and then let you loose on the world. And I quickly learned that is a recipe for disaster. So in my next move, I decided to get very intentional. And at that time, and I've told the story a few times, Selling Power magazine puts out a list of the top 50 companies to sell for. And they did so 14 years ago, and they do so today. So as the entrepreneurial young man that I was, I applied to all 50 companies.
Good man.
I got calls back from Clear Channel and from Aramark. And I, after lots of evaluation, I decided to join Aramark and spent 4 wonderful years grinding it out in the uniform industry and learning what it was like to be a professional salesperson. And then the rest is kind of history. So that's how I got to this point.
Excellent. So let me ask you this question. Have you ever been blindsided with a fabulous kick in the head that taught you a really valuable lesson?
I would absolutely say that quitting my job after 4 months in sales because I was terrible at it and I was miserable because I didn't know what the hell I was doing and I wasn't showing success and I was working way too hard. That first failure foundationally said to me, David, you need to learn sales process. You need to dive in. You need to take it seriously. And it's one of the reasons and a lot of people have this mantra, so I'm not saying I created it, but I absolutely adopted it and I absolutely evangelize it. I believe you need to treat your professional sales career like a professional athlete treats their career. Got to work hard, got to put the hours, practice, grind it out, all that stuff. Yes.
I could not agree more. The problem is, I think most people see sales as you just show up, talk about the product, walk away with a check, which clearly isn't how it works. And I think there's another disconnect, which is that a lot of founders and owners who come from either technical or finance backgrounds see sales as this expensive dark art where you essentially rack up a load of expenses, dining out, playing golf, and you're overpaid and oversexed. And again, sadly, neither of those things were true in my case. And I discovered,
mine too.
Well, I discovered very early on that what I read in the 300 sales books that I read, because like you, I'm an avid learner. And all of that stuff was out of date by the time Queen Victoria was a kid. And it was frustrating as hell because I was looking for ways to make it work. And by dint of failure, I learned occasionally some good lessons, but I'm a bit thick and I have to have the lesson beaten into me several times. How fortunate were you to find mentors early in your career, or was that something you had to go out and search for?
No, I was definitely fortunate. I've worked for some really shit sales leaders, but I've also worked for some really great ones. And the great ones I leaned into, and the bad ones I rebelled against. But the ones I leaned into, shout out to like Gregory Donovan and Jeff Walker and Rob Kraveritis. So at like each of my and Matt Dakey, at each of my major stops. So Aramark had some great leaders that I learned from. I learned a lot from this guy named John Zeffel, who was the GM of Aramark and taught me a lot about running a business. I learned a ton at my next step from Rob Kraveritis about being a sales leader and managing teams and holding people accountable with love. And then when I got to Monster, Matt Dakey, embraced me and taught me like how to like really lead teams through lots of empathy. And then when I got to ADP, and started there as a sales leader and spent 6 years, leading teams. At ADP, guys like Gregory Donovan that taught me, ridiculous deep dive sales process, and Jeff Walker teaching me again, leading teams with empathy and caring and just unfathomable love for the people that you work with, but also making sure that they understood expectations and caring around it, and how to have that perfect balance of accountability and caring that really drive results. Lots of great mentors, and loved leaning into those folks. They've taught me a ton.
Well, again, the whole concept of sales for many people is it's hard-nosed, it's very black and white, it's heartless. And what I'm seeing from this conversation, and I know that you collaborate with Dale Dupree, don't you, and with God Sales Rebellion, that whole piece around really genuinely being compassionate, loving your people, understanding them is really key. But I think you touched on something else that may be a clue to your success, which is learning how to run a business. Because in my experience, a lot of salespeople are very green and naive when it comes to what a business, how a business runs, what it needs, and what makes it work or fail. How did you find getting that education early in your career colored the rest of it?
Yeah, one of the first things is I learned that sales is not the only channel in a business. So to run a business, you need to understand a business. That means you need to understand the finance side of it. You need to understand the operations side of it. You need to understand the marketing side of it. You need to understand the legal side of it and the ramifications of the contracts you're signing, what the frickin' language means. You can learn so much about a business by reading the contracts that you're having people sign, and then working with the operations and implementation deployment teams that actually have to deliver it, and then the people that have to service it. So one of the things that I learned and have taken with me every time I start an organization is meet all the moving pieces. Because once you sell something, lots of things happen. And before you sell that thing, lots of things had to happen to get you to that point where you're signing a contract. And you need to understand the before, current, and after that goes on in the world to be able to then really deliver your solution and talk to your solution and understand the ramifications of your solution on the business. That's a lot of running a business, is understanding the moving parts of it. And so I have been fortunate that I like asking lots of questions and I love meeting people. So leaning into those different parts really taught me a lot about that.
Well, this speaks to something else that people like John McTeague and Chris Ortolano and Rod Jefferson are all talking about, and Mark Schaefer and Matthew Sweezy. They're all talking about this customer journey and understanding and mapping that out. And you touched on it there. When a salesperson touches the customer, that's not where the journey begins or ends. It's just the middle bit. Colin Shaw, on his podcast, he was talking about what's the customer journey when you go to a drive-through McDonald's. And his colleague Ryan was describing it. Someone gets hungry, then there's a whole bunch of fireworks and kicking off. Then they pile this rugby team of children into the car. Then there's some squabbling and fighting. Then as they're approaching the queue, there's a bunch of stuff where they're trying to work out what the orders are. And then he's worried he's going to forget. They get to the squawk box. Then they put the order through, and then they have to repeat it. And eventually they get through that painful process. Then they pay. Then they get to the checkout, and they're due to pick their stuff up. But maybe something's not right with the order. If you've got vegetarian kids, then you've got to sit around for 10 minutes waiting for them to cook it to order. And then you go home, and you've got all of that stuff going on. And then there's the after the purchase experience. The problem is, I think so few salespeople really think like the customer. They don't think as the customer. Some of them think about them, but they don't think as them. The net result of that is, if they don't really understand the moving parts within their own organization as well, they don't understand how important it is to have marketing, lead generation, sales, customer success, customer support, account management, operations, finance, legal, and all of those things aligned. Because as far as the customer is concerned, it's just dealing with outreach. It's not dealing with David. It's the whole experience. So what do you teach your guys right from day one in order to ensure that they've got that big picture and they're not selling selfishly?
Yeah, it's a lot about and I've done a few different posts on this. It's you need to treat learning an organization as a process. And the process starts with learning the organization. So, that is one of the first things that I teach people is meet with all the people that you're going to touch. If you're going to touch them at some point, in the next year as you go about your journey. Meet them now and ask them some very key questions. One of the ones that people don't ask them first is build a relationship, make friends. And then it's how do we best work together? And what have people done in the past that has hurt that relationship? And understanding those pieces.
Great.
So once you understand those, because you can always ask, what do you do? How does it work? Those are the most common. But how do we actually work together? And what are the sins of the past that I don't want to repeat? And then what advice do you have for me to ramp up quick? So like, that's a big piece of it. Then it's understanding the process itself from a selling perspective and all the different stakeholders and who's involved and when, and building relationships across that. And I haven't even talked about product yet. Product, frankly, isn't even part of my first 30 days when I join an organization. It's all of that stuff. Then it's account mapping and planning for who I'm going to be speaking to and getting multi-threaded and doing account research and, getting sequences and messaging down, because I don't need to know shit about what I'm selling until I know the business, until I know who I want to sell to, until I understand all of the work, because I don't need to actually sell anything. Because my first conversation with someone, I'm also not talking about product. I'm doing discovery. I'm asking lots of questions. I'm uncovering pain. I'm uncovering their journey to get to this point and their journey after we leave. So it's understanding all that stuff. You really don't need to know anything about product until you actually go to talk about the product, which is typically in your second or third meeting with a customer. So, yeah, please.
No, my heart soars like an eagle listening to you. If you're listening and you're thinking about recruiting somebody, okay, the onboarding, the pre-onboarding and the onboarding process are really critical. And that's where you set them up to succeed or fail. And do not waste time, energy, and effort boring them to death with your ugly baby, which is your product. Because the customer doesn't care about your product. They don't even buy your product. They buy a way to get away from their pain and move to their better future. And I've worked in 500 different segments of the market in the last 17 years. And I can honestly tell you, I don't even know what half the products are that my clients have sold. Now, my average client will grow somewhere between 300 and 1400% without me knowing about the product. So you really genuinely do not need to know about that. So let's talk about enterprise sales, because I know that's your background. It's a tough job. Essentially, you are chief cat herder, and you have to marshal all these different resources internally, externally, possibly partners as well.
Yep.
So before someone moves into an enterprise sales role, what kind of scar tissue do you recommend they pick up so that they're ready for it?
To your point, get really good at internal negotiation and movement, multi-threading in a deal, working with multiple stakeholders, understanding multiple layers of pain, multiple how all these different people interact with your solution and what they care about. And then yes, building relationship, partner journey, cat hurry, all of those things are super important. It's also, you need to build some scar tissue around length of deal. One of the big challenges I've had when I've onboarded folks that have come from a small or medium-sized business into the enterprise is they start getting like really fearful and scared and depressed and all these things like 3 months into the job. And they're like, David, I haven't closed anything yet. I'm like, yeah, you're not going to for like 9 more months. And they're like, well, how am I going to feed my family? I'm like, you need to find some singles and doubles within the deal, or you just need to, grit out this piece, because this is a time and territory play. Enterprise sales is all about time and territory. It's going to take you 3 to 6 months to ramp up, get deals in cycle, get to the point where you're actually selling things. Then it's going to take you a month or 2 months often to negotiate those deals and go through security reviews. And then it's going to take you another month to 2 months to deploy them. So you'll from the day you start enterprise sales, you may get your first paycheck 6 to 9 months to a year to more once you start, depending on the size of the deals, the complexity of the deals. So you need to build some skin around that piece. So internal negotiations, internal partner mapping, longer sales cycles, getting comfortable ramping up there.
One thing that I've learned, and I've found that in David Epstein's book, Range, he talks about this, and it's certainly been my experience, is that people who operate in a specialist market that requires a high degree of creativity tend to perform better if they have a broad range of experience. So when you're recruiting, because enterprise selling is really an act of creativity. There's a lot of science and discipline and structure to it. But it also requires you to be very, very creative in terms of how you manage the different resources, personalities, expectations, timeframes, and so on. When you're recruiting, what are you looking for in terms of the personal qualities of a future enterprise seller?
So I'm often looking, frankly, when I hire into enterprise sales, I like to hire people that have had multiple years of enterprise sales experience. It's a tough jump to get good at going from like a mid-market to an enterprise role. But if I need to do that, and I have hired those people before that I thought could do the job, where I've hired them is when they were domain experts. So they were without question a domain expert in the product, in the talk track, in the solution, and they needed to then just sell it to larger organizations. That often is one of the big pieces, because when you get into enterprise, you're going to be dealing with very senior people who are very sophisticated, at least typically. And so you need to know as much or more about them than they do, and be able to really speak to their pain and how you've helped other organizations overcome it. So domain expertise is really important to me. And then it's, yes, the ability to build relationships, internal navigate, challenge the hell out of status quo, be able to ask lots of questions. So people that are really curious, that will continue to peel the onion and ask second, third, fourth layer questions. Those are some of the really important skills. What I've seen a lot of mid-market reps do is they're really soft on the first layer of questions. They don't dig, they don't uncover real pain, they don't challenge to try and move people away from a uncomfortable current state. Because a lot of times in the enterprise, they have some things figured out. They grew to $1 billion or more. I mean, they have processes, they have some things figured out. And a lot of them are working, and the change management is hard. So you need to be really, really good at uncovering pain, uncovering current state, and then helping teach them on the benefits of the future, and then building a mutual action plan and a roadmap for that change to make it make sense, and then help them navigate their own internal journey with, here's who we need to tag in, here's why, here's when, and then do the same thing on your side, and then aligning teams. So, I mean, there's a lot of that goes on. So you need someone who's strategic, who's creative, who pushes, asks questions, knows lots of different sides of the business, is a domain expert. I mean, you need a lot to be good at the enterprise level. That's often why I hire people that have that experience. But if not, foundationally, you need to be super coachable, willing to learn, take direction, and then domain expertise. Like, it's really hard for me to teach you everything about a solution and all of it, and a talk, and all the talk, everything that goes into it, and teach you enterprise sales. You need to typically be really deep on one, because if you're shallow on both, man, it's going to take a long time for you to get speed to ramp.
Excellent. What about the habits? If you look at your own habits and the habits of the best enterprise salespeople that you know, what do they do every day, every week, every month, every quarter without having to be told or have someone's foot on their neck?
Very self-motivated. You give them an end goal and they figure it out. So they work hard, they put in the hours, they do the research, they're curious, they learn. When they run into a problem, they just go try and figure it out. They call people, they talk to people, they ask questions, they ask for help. Yeah, very self-motivated.
What about planning, organization, rehearsal, preparation?
Yep. That goes into the kind of what we were talking earlier, like you need to treat your career like an athlete. So there's a lot of watching game tape, always practicing, always getting better, seeking coaches, seeking mentors, every day trying to hone your craft, and also realizing that you're only as good as your last sale last year. I mean, that's one of the crazy things about being in any sales role, but definitely in the enterprise. When you have multi-million-dollar quotas, you may be number one, you may win the trophy, you may win President's Club, but there's an effing reset button that comes every single year, and you better have a pipeline and you better be ready for it, because if you don't and you haven't done all the work to get there, I mean, it's gonna be a long, hard road. Like, that's where a lot of enterprise salespeople may have a successful first year and have a terrible second and third year, is because they spent all this time on these deals and they didn't have the funnel, and they didn't have the seeding in the middle and close to end, and then strong follow through to get either renewals or expansions within deals. And when that happens, because enterprise deals could take 3, 6, 9 months, a year, once you get behind, and you can get behind pretty quick if you're not doing all the right things all the time, you could jeopardize an entire year. And that's where you see, some enterprise salespeople have these big, like, great year, terrible year, like big gaps, because they fail in the middle.
You've touched on a couple of really important points here. One is that prospecting, even in enterprise, is a daily habit, and it needs to be continued despite the fact you've got 2 or 3 big deals in the offing. And when you're in the account, you need to keep prospecting throughout the account, because if you don't have the account coverage, you're toast. You're going to end up in some nasty little bid where you're going to be commoditized, you're going to be driven down on price, and the research that Corporate Visions has done on this is really depressing, but also extremely enlightening. The average conversion rate on buy cycles that then end up in a bid situation is 2.6%. That's 1 in 38.5 buy cycles end up in a win for organizations that end up in a bid. Now, when you consider the cost of pursuit and you then multiply that by 38.5, that's an astronomical hidden cost, which then points to the highest hidden cost in any business, which is wrong hires. So when you're looking at predictive hiring, how do you ensure, because if you're doing these kind of deals and they take 12 months to land their first one, how do you identify quickly whether or not you've made a terrible hire and you've hired Mr. Bean instead of James Bond?
You could typically find out within the first 30 to 60 days. If in the first 30 days they've met everyone in the organization, have a list of target accounts, starting to get good at the, mastered the questions, starting to set meetings, if that's happening in the first 30 to 60 days and they're starting to build a pipeline quick, they're typically going to be successful. Most of the time, people, if they got to that role of enterprise, it means they can talk. It means they can present. It means they can form some sort of compelling argument because they would have had to get to the role. But are they willing to put in all the work to be successful? And you often see the product of that early on. And then it's more of the continuation of it as you go. So I'm able to often tell if someone's going to be successful within that first probably 60 days just by how I'm seeing them learn and how I'm seeing them put in effort and work.
So there are a couple of rules here. Better no breath than bad breath in a sales position, and hire slow and fire fast.
Yep.
So tell me this, what's your cadence when it comes to building the bench of candidates to make sure that you're never in a position where you have to recruit reactively?
Oh, you're always interviewing. Like that, if you're a sales leader, that is one of your core roles. You should be interviewing people every single week. You should be recruiting constantly. That was one of the things I was measured and tasked with by former leaders is, are we constantly looking for good people, interviewing good people when good people come to you? And that's also one of the reasons why I've spent as much time as I have building a brand on LinkedIn. Because when you do that, people will be like, hey, I love your work. Let me know if you're ever hiring, or I'm thinking about this, or, you get an opportunity to just continuously meet people and meet good people. But it is the job of every sales leader out there to always be recruiting. It is a fact that the day you lose somebody, it's going to take you probably, especially in a large organization, Fortune 500, it's going to take you 90 days to replace them. It's going to take you 30 days to get the rec open because of the internal stupid red tape and dealing with recruiters and fucking job postings. And then you're going to have to interview lots of people. And then you're going to have them interview with lots of people. So you're going to have 90 days of revenue gap. And on a 1.2, 1.5, $2 million quota, you're going to lose between $300,000 and $700,000 in revenue in that 90 days. And you're going to then also have to put open territory, open accounts, open opportunities onto your other reps that are already freaking super busy. And you know what that's going to do to them? I mean, they may be happy about it, but they probably won't be. They won't be as happy as you think they'll be because they're already busy with all of their shit. So now you're going to burn out more people and you have a higher chance of getting people to leave. So you should probably always be recruiting.
Absolutely. And you can cut the hire cycle by months if you've got a bench and you've got 5 people lined up who fit the profile and have gone through muster, and you've got them to the point where you've contracted with them and you have the conversation, say, David, I haven't got a job at the moment, but if and when I do have a vacancy, which will happen, then is there any reason why you wouldn't be willing to accept my offer? And agree that stuff up front, because then all you have to deal with is the notice period. Now, that may be 3 months in enterprise. Often it's still only a month, and no one really wants them hanging around once they've handed in their notice. So again, what do you do in the pre-onboarding during their gardening leave in order to ensure that they are up to speed as best as possible? So by the time they have joined the company and they're having those introductory conversations with everybody across the organization, they are already ahead of the curve.
Yeah, and different organizations have different policies on the information you can share before someone joins. So of course, you're going to always want to talk to HR, talk to your boss, and make sure you're following what you can be shared. But what I've often shared is territory lists, so they can do a lot of their multi-threaded account planning ahead of time. That's often a week to 2 weeks worth of work. If you've got anywhere from 25 to 100 to even 200 accounts, being able to go 5, 6 across and looking for different people that you're eventually going to want to speak to and doing a lot of your research ahead of time. That research, by doing it prior to starting, has allowed me to get a jump start and saved me weeks of work while I got started. So that's one. And then you can also often have people do some of the early relationship building. that takes place in the first few weeks. So those are probably the two I'd recommend. Account research and relationship building can often be done before you get started. And that's often before you even share any real proprietary information with someone, because a list of accounts at the enterprise are going to be the same damn list you get at any company, so it's not a big deal. We're all targeting Fortune 500 folks, Fortune 1000, it's fucking list of people. So that's not a big secret. So that and internal relationships are often the areas that I would have them focus on.
Excellent. Okay, so let's take the conversation in a slightly different direction. You're running an enterprise sale. What acts of idiocy and self-sabotage do you normally have to head off from your internal organization? And how important is it that you get the internal team on side and fully aligned?
It's so effing important. Oh my God. So rule of thumb. For every minute of a meeting, you do a minute of prep. Simple. Anyone that's going to be part of the meeting needs to be part of the prep. If they're not part of the prep, they either can't be in the meeting, or they can't speak, or you have to find a freaking way to get hold of them and make sure they know what they're doing. I look at selling as almost a concert. You are the conductor.
Yeah, it's a great analogy.
You need to have this section and that's playing music, and this section's playing music, and this section's playing music. They all have their different beats. They all have their different notes that they need to hit. And it's your job to practice with every single one of them, know where they're handing off, know when they're handing off, how they're handing off. I mean, literally it's, hi, I'm going to say this, and then I'm going to throw it to you. What are you going to say? Okay, you're going to say that, then you're going to throw it to this person, then you're going to throw it to this person, then you're going to throw it back to me. Then I'm going to throw it to you. Here's what we're all going to say. Here's what we're going to share. And then it's, here's the customer's environment. Here's all the conversations we've had at this point. This is their tech stack. This is their pain. This is what they care about. Here's who they are as people. Say this, don't say this, tie this here, don't tie it here. Like, it's literally, you're putting on a play or running a concert, and you need to do all the prep. So by the time you show up, it's not your first run, it's your second or third run, and you're just executing. And that's what it should look like.
My pal and mentor, Brian Sullivan, who wrote the book Sonder Enterprise Selling, he always describes enterprise sales as cat herding. And it really is a tough job. The only job that I think is harder is channel enterprise sales. If you're selling direct, that's tough. But if you're now adding to the mix, 3, 4, 5, a dozen partners. I interviewed my old AE from 18 years ago, and he's just closed this $100 million deal, and he upsold it from 5 million, and he had 12 partners in the deal. Now, the ulcer that he must have had being generated, and what was really interesting, and again, this is something that so few direct salespeople really appreciate. Your partners, so if you're selling into Fortune 500, people like Accenture, Pricewaterhouse, KPMG, McKinsey, Bain, Boston Consulting, they have the ear of the board. And in Graham's case, he managed to knock nearly 6 months off the sales cycle and get hand delivered to the board because he aligned what he was trying to do with what the consultancy was trying to help the company do at board level. And if you don't do that, it's a huge mistake. And they will find a way to throw a spanner in the works because they have an agenda. So if you aren't aligning with them, and if you're taking on an enterprise role where partners are involved, not only do you need to speak to the internal people within your own organization, but you better damn well get to know all of those people within the partners within the first 3 months.
Yep. ADP had and I would also echo that for private equity firms. And so ADP had two main, large organization, lots of channel partners. We had two organizations within the organization. One of them was a director of strategic partnerships, and we had a few different ones of those, and their job was to work with the big consulting firms and make sure there was clear alignment between our teams, their teams, and then they brokered the relationship. So some things were always going on, communication was always happening. So just in case there was a field rep that was somehow stupid and forgot that, they would track Salesforce. They would see all open opportunities. They'd see account names. They'd look at alignment between the books and make sure that they brought people together. And then we did a very similar thing with our private equity channel to make sure that if PE ownership was involved or if a channel partner consulting firm was involved, we always had line of sight to that, made sure they were in deals early. So that's a great point.
And that's the key, early. Yeah. Don't bring them in late. Make sure that you treat them like partners. And partners help each other get better. Rising tide raises all boats. And the problem is that too often vendors have a view that the partner is partly competitive because they're taking some margin. They are trying to go behind the partner's back. If you try to go behind a partner's back, you better be ready to retire. Because
they will find out.
Again?
They will find out.
But not only will they find out, but they will get even.
Yeah.
and it will backfire. So treat your partners as your equals, and work with them by understanding what drives them, why they are in business, what their personal goals and objectives are, and develop that relationship and be vulnerable enough to ask for help. And so to bring back to the beginning what David said, you have to be ready to ask for help. Vulnerability is the sign of courage. That willingness to put yourself out there and recognize that you don't have all the answers is critical. Because in these complex sales, you cannot have all the answers. And if you think you do, you are destined for a very short and painful career. In fact, you're destined for a very short and painful career end.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree.
Excellent. Okay. In terms of the things that you're challenged by at the moment, what are you struggling with? What are you wrestling with?
I think the biggest thing for me, and I feel like there's probably a lot of people going through this, it's really hard to be new at something. So I'm new at outreach. I've been here 4 months, which is very new in an organization, especially an organization where my previous one, I was there for 6 years. And I didn't realize how hard it was to be new. And some things that I'm, trying to become aware of and hold myself accountable to is I don't need to be successful today. I need to do the right motions today. I often, and I found this very early on, I posted about a bunch on LinkedIn about it. I was working like 12, 14 hours a day. I'd work till 10 o'clock at night. I'd sleep for a few hours, then I'd wake back up and start working again. And I found myself getting burnt out really, really fast. And I was miserable in my first few months because of that. So challenging myself to slow down, to enjoy the journey a little bit more, pace myself and know that it's not about winning today. It's about, hey, am I getting incrementally better every single day with internal relationships, with talk tracks, with, click paths within the software that I'm working in? Am I making positive movement every day? And that's what it is. And so part of that, and I'll put a bow on this, is redefining what a good day looks like. What a good day looked like for me at ADP is what I tried to bring to outreach. And I was arrogant and wrong about that because I needed to redefine what good looked like and what a good day looked like. And I also needed to balance that with homeschooling a kid and managing a pandemic. So those are some things that I'm struggling with. And it's that redefinition has been helpful.
I interviewed the global operations director for a private equity firm, and she was pointing to something in this as well, that the way people work will have changed dramatically. We've all gone through this upheaval and trauma with the pandemic, and people aren't going to want to go back to the way things were. But it's really important to be able to have that pastoral element as a manager, to understand how each individual within the team wants to work and the challenges that they're facing on a day-to-day basis. And it's our responsibility as managers to make sure that they are getting what they need, and allowing them to have a voice, but also understanding how we can facilitate in a way that works well for them, so that the organization is sticky, they're loyal to it, they feel like they're getting their needs met. And part of this is about learning how to separate and discipline yourself to have a work day and a home life. And also making sure that you understand that that's what your team are going through, and counseling them and coaching them to ensure that they feel like they've got that balance in the right order so that they don't burn out. So I'm really curious, in terms of planning and structuring someone's quarter or even longer, how do you go about teaching them around things like time blocking and diary blocking, the discipline and rigor of that first 120 days while they're onboarding, to make sure they know what they need to know, by when they need to know it, where they can find it, how it's going to be measured, to what standard, what red flags are, and so on? What sort of process do you go through?
Yeah, so the question in itself is an explanation. And I know you've probably dug into this a lot with just how you've asked the question, because you asked the question is a methodical process that you're leading me through. So it's fantastic, but it is a lot of that. So I'm a believer that you don't need to know something till you need to know it. So what I mean by that is first 30 days, brand, internal relationships, account mapping. Next 30 days, questions, talk tracks around first meeting. To me, a first meeting is, hey, I want 5 minutes of intro, setting an agenda, mutual agenda, ACE-M framework. ACE framework is appreciate, confirm time, set agenda. M is mutual framework. It's winning by design, plus M, which is mutual agenda. That's kind of my addition. And it sounds something like, hey, our agenda for today is this, but I want to make sure this is a good call. What's your agenda? Then it's 15 minutes of discovery, followed by 10 minutes of alignment, followed by 5 minutes of next steps and scheduling it. So that's first meeting. We haven't talked product yet. There may be a little bit of product and alignment where you said this is how we help with this, but I'll show you next time. Then it's, so getting good at that motion, that's day 30 to 60. 60 to 90, and again, a next immediate step is starting to master the demo, starting to master the click path in the demo, talk track of the demo, slides of the demo, internal relationships if we need to tag into the demo and getting them prepared for it. So that's like 90. And then, you know, there are other steps afterwards, which is often customer journey, realignment within the journey, more people to tag in. It could be more demos. It could be then InfoSec reviews and getting different people. And then it could also be involvement of legal and other things like that. So it's, you know, really understanding what is the sales process, when does it typically take place, at what point in the sale, and then mapping your ramp up timeline to that part of the journey and starting to get good at it right before you need to, and not too early, because time is finite. Your brain can only absorb so much information. It needs to get good at it, the next thing it's going to do. So you need to teach people in the appropriate order, hold them accountable, and show them what good looks like in the appropriate order. Because if they start, you know, learning the end of the process, but they haven't mastered the beginning of the process, but their next meeting is the beginning of the process, they're never fucking going to get to the end. So it doesn't really matter, does it? So it's that.
And that first 120 days is really important, because in that first 120 days, the new hire is putting you, your company, the people that they work with on probation. They're deciding, is this the job I was sold? Is my boss an ass? Do I like the people that I'm working with? Can I be successful here? Was I better off where I was? Mm-hmm. And if you are not mapping out that 120 days, even for veterans, and helping them create that structured route map to success, plus the pre-onboarding process to make sure that you're setting them up to succeed, then shame on you as a manager or a leader.
Yep. And if you're not joining all of their calls and making time for all their calls, if you can't join, finding someone that can, another AE, someone more senior, you know, do not let them go out alone. I don't care how effing experienced they are. They're not experienced at your organization. If you let them go it alone, they are going to fail.
Absolutely. And I think you need to let people fail. However, you don't let them fail needlessly in ways that are not going to deliver value in terms of lessons. So let them fail internally during the rehearsal, for example, and you know, see how they respond to that kind of pressure. The other thing that I think—
I just highlight one more thing there, because you bring up such a great point. They're evaluating you in your first 120 days.
Yeah.
Your job as a leader in the first 3 to 4 months that someone works for you, make them feel strong.
Absolutely.
The feedback you give them needs to be upbeat, positive. I really liked how you do here. Tweak this one little thing. It can't be, hey, you did these 17 things wrong. I like that one thing. You need to, for every one piece of negative criticism, you need to give them 5 good ones. If there is an imbalance there, they will feel weak. And if they feel weak, they will mentally spiral, and they will feel like this may have been a bad decision. It is almost one of the number one failures I see of new leaders is they don't make their people feel strong early on. They tell them all the things they're doing wrong and all the areas they need to get better at. And you know what? No shit. They're brand new and they already know all that. So don't tell them things they already know. Make them feel strong and guide them and give them 1 or 2 things to work on each time. Make sure they get good at that. Then give them 1 or 2 more, while stroking and making them feel really good along the way and reinforcing the positive behaviors. Because then they're going to build a strong foundation here. They're going to fix incrementally things that are wrong, and they're going to feel good about it while doing it. If you don't do that, you are going to have people fail and spiral early, and it's such a shame.
And this points to something that you find in transactional analysis, and David Sandler was really smart at bringing this up. The difference between role and identity. Role is what you do. Identity is who you are. And if you're not giving them that strength early on, then what you'll find is that they will see themselves as an identity failure. And that internal script will eat away at them. And when they do eventually go out on their own, they will crumble under pressure. Yes. So you have to be really clear about building up their identity as well as their role performance, and bolstering that throughout. Because a manager's job is not to manage, ironically. A manager's job is to hire the best people, get the best out of them, then make sure they have the tools and resources they need to do their best work every day, and then help them clear the path of roadblocks and protect them from acts of idiocy from above. Now, if you don't understand your role as a manager to do that, then chances are what you will tend to fall into the trap of doing is you will be either a rescuer or a persecutor of a manager. Persecutors drive the lowest common denominator behaviors so that people do the minimum necessary not to get a bollocking and not to get in your firing line. And rescuers diminish by creating the culture of learned helplessness, and that then in turn creates upward delegation and the manager being run ragged. Your job is to help them be the best that they can be. And I interviewed Tom Castley, who's a colleague of yours, and he said that the best managers were the ones who, when he promoted them from an SDR, they were the ones with the deepest and widest account penetration. They were almost never the top producer. Because what those people had was great empathy. They had compassion. They had a genuine interest in helping the customer achieve their overall objectives, not to make the transaction happen, and not just focused on their individual personal production target. And I think that was a really powerful insight.
I think that's phenomenal. It is the most common trait I see in junior managers is the need to make themselves feel strong.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, I've worked for people that have been in leadership for 20 years that are still junior managers.
Yeah.
So it doesn't matter how long
experience 20 times over.
I'm sorry?
1 year's experience 20 times over.
They don't learn from that. Number one thing, understand people's, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, the other thing to not do is when you're doing ride-alongs is turn up and say, let me show you how you do it, son.
Right.
Because they're not going to learn anything. You have to let them do it. You've done the rehearsal and the preparation and the planning. Let them do it. And if they fail in front of the customer, not the end of the world. There are more opportunities. There is always the deal of a lifetime out there every single month. Okay, just because you screw it up doesn't mean you can't go back as well. If you're vulnerable, you can go back and you say, David, I messed up. It's clear that I screwed up. Do you mind helping me out? What did I do wrong? And Anthony Iannarino talks about this as one of his stories. And I think so does Larry Levine. Both of them were taken to the woodshed and given a damn good beating by customers. And they learned from that moment by asking for help, saying, I fucked up. Now, what could I have done better? And they got a masterclass in how to sell from the customer, because your customers are your best teachers. Don't be afraid to ask for help from them either.
Yep, no doubt.
Look, we're coming to the top of the hour. Tell me this, if you had a golden ticket and you could whisper in the idiot David's ear, age 23, what choice bit of advice would you give him?
That's a great question. I would say, and Simon Sinek wrote a great book about this, finite games versus infinite games. Early on in my career, I was playing a finite game. And what that looked like is winning at all costs, putting myself above relationships, doing a lot of things that you're talking about, not asking for help, trying to be the strong man, not realizing the importance of brand and legacy. I was a young, dumb kid, and those were things I did. I learned probably 6-ish years ago at this point, this concept of infinite games, where it's not about winning or losing. It legitimately is about playing the game and keeping the ball in the air as long as possible. And that's where the concept of brand, internal and external brand, networking, relationship building, rising tides, literally working with everyone to get stronger and better, and being a much more collaborative corporate citizen, and also spending a lot more time coaching and helping other people and doing more for others than I did for myself. Learning those lessons were tough lessons to learn, but they've made me a way better human for it. And I am where I am because I stopped playing a finite game. So I would challenge anyone, understand the difference between finite games and infinite games, and in your life and absolutely business are infinite games.
Absolutely. And I think it points to something else, which is really important in sales, which is get away from being transactional and focus on creating lifetime customers, lifetime relationships within your own organization, within your own industry, and certainly within your partners. So tell me this, what are you reading, watching, listening to at the moment that you think is absolutely belting?
So what I'm reading right now, and funny enough, it's called Nobody Wants to Read Your Shit. And that's by Stephen Pressfield. I'm trying to, I like to write, and I like to help people, and I try and post on LinkedIn every single day. I've slowed down a little bit as I ramp up at Outreach because I just need a better work-life balance. So it is real, folks. You can do it. You just need to choose what's priority. And so when I start doing it again, which will be here probably in the next few months, I want to come back with a fire. And so I'm trying to hone that muscle and strengthen that muscle right now. I just finished, and I actually interviewed him on my podcast, Rejection Proof by Jia Zhang. And that was a phenomenal book. My podcast is Psych and Sales. And what we do is we talk to people around mental health and sales. So Jia wrote Rejection Proof. And so that's one of the most common mental challenges that early salespeople, and frankly, salespeople in general deal with. So he was a great guest. And that book is like literally all about putting yourself out there, purposely trying to get rejected. So you realize that when you get rejected, the world doesn't end. So that was a really good one. And I've got a stack here of books that I'm reading in the future. So, but that's what I'm doing right now. Yeah. I try and read about a book a month. That's the goal.
Excellent. So how can people get hold of you, David?
Super visible on LinkedIn, David Weiss Outreach. Check out my podcast, Psych and Sales. Andy Rasick and I wrote our book, Your Definitive Sales Career Guide, and we put our contact information in that. But really, I mean, LinkedIn is probably your best bet. I have a rule. If you reach out to me and try and sell me something, I will tell you to piss off. If you reach out to me and say, hey, I'd like to make a friend, and I'd like to get to know you in your journey, and I've got some questions I think you can help me with, I respond in 24 hours to every single one of those. So choose your path, choose it wisely. Let's be friends. And yeah, reach out to me there.
Fabulous. David Weiss, thank you so much.
Marcus, it's been a pleasure. Thank you for having me on.
This is Marcus Kauke signing off once again from the Inquisitor podcast. If you've enjoyed this conversation, then please get in touch at marcuskauke@me.com or contact me on LinkedIn. In the meantime, stay safe and happy selling. Bye-bye.